Hey everyone, this is Dave from the Adobe Character Animator team, and for a while I've been working on an animated cartoon series called Consoles. And when the first one came out, I did a huge 2-hour tutorial called the Complete Cartoon Workflow, which I highly recommend checking out if you haven't already. It goes through my whole process of rigging multiple characters, recording them, bringing them all into After Effects to composite them all together. But now I've made a few more of those. And with every one I've made, comments come in like asking how I did a specific technique, or are there additional things I've learned as I've done this more and more efficient ways to get through things, or better workflow, or tips and tricks that might help with other productions. And so that's what I've done. I've compiled a top 10 list of the things that I think I've learned over the past couple of cartoons using Character Animator and After Effects. And that's what I'm going to share today. So if that sounds good to you, let's get started. Adding little interactions between your characters and the environments they're in will help them feel more like they're actually inhabiting the world. So for example, in the beginning of Consoles Episode 3, when PlayStation is opening this drawer, he kind of motions his hands in front of it and it kind of flips open like this. This is a really simple 6-frame animation, but it sells the effect and it goes quickly enough that it feels like he really is opening the door. And this was really easy to set up. In the original Photoshop file, I just had this door that shows up above the snacks, and then I would duplicate it and then say, go up to Edit, Transform, Skew, and then that's going to give you this little bounding box. But the nice thing is you can really just take the edges and skew this however you want. And so I might make this come a little bit more in and out as if it were, kind of coming towards me. And there you go. That's one extra frame, and I would probably call that 2. And then it would keep going, so on and so forth. So I've got 1, 2, 3. At a certain point, I flip over to 4, 5, 6 for it to be open. And then in After Effects, I just give 1 frame for each part of the animation. And because this happens so quickly, it just looks like a door very quickly opening. It gives the scene a little bit of depth. It connects the character to the background. It makes this world feel a little bit more lived in. Sometimes you can find shortcuts for the way that your characters are behaving. So for example, when PlayStation first comes in this intro scene, he's kind of walking in and then opens up that door. But in Character Animator, you could add a walk animation to a character to allow them to do that, but I felt like I really didn't need that for just this really simple, 2 or 3 second walk. So all I did was instead make keyframes in After Effects of the character just going up and down. So you see, I've connected this character to a null layer. Those are one of those invisible layers that I talk about in other tutorials. And all I'm doing with this is moving it up and down. So I have it move down a little bit and up and down and up. All I'm doing is keyframes where I'm changing the position slightly and moving it back and forth. And then I'm just kind of moving him to the side as well. I actually have this null connected to another null that is doing the left to right movement. So this null layer is taking care of the up and down movement. So it's going, up and down. And then this one is connected to null 4. And because of that, this one is moving left to right at the same time. So this allows me to kind of focus on these 2 individual things and just move my character with a nice little hop side to side without having to do the full rigging of a walk animation. When I find little shortcuts like this that, save me a little bit of time and not having to rig a character for one specific purpose, because this character's legs are hidden behind the counter, I don't need to show that. And I do this several times with other close-up shots for the other characters as well. It's just a nice little thing that saves me a little bit of extra time. In Character Animator, we call our characters puppets. And yeah, all the characters in this cartoon are individual puppets, Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch. But the Snack Division Wizard Machine, which is kind of the whole point of the plot of the 3rd episode, is actually a puppet too. Now, it's not a traditional puppet. I'm not doing any head tracking or eye movements or anything like that, but it does have the blinking light treatment and a few other things. So if I go into rig mode here, I can see actually I removed all the behaviors from this thing. So if I click on plus, there's this remove all behaviors thing down here. I ended up doing that. This started as a Photoshop file. Well, actually it started in Adobe Fresco. I drew it. Then I brought it into Photoshop, did a little bit more organizing. And the only thing that I really had interact here are the lights. So I have a group called lights, And in here, I have 3 different groups of lights that I've added in here. So the first group here lights up like this, and I've set it a linear dodge add blending mode to make those look like they're glowing. And then it cycles to the next one and the next one. The only thing I did here in the lights, the main group that holds all 3 of these layers, is I added down here the cycle layers behavior. And that is going to allow me to determine how fast these lights move. So I'm just going to turn them all on. And here I can see that I start immediately, I'm moving from top to bottom, and I'm advancing every 47 frames. Why 47? I don't know. I just picked it out of thin air and just tried it and saw what it looked like. And all the robots actually have different things. So, one might move at 32 frames, every 32 frames. Another might be 62 frames, something like that, to make the lights always feel like they're flashing on and off. This is something I do for also the lights in the city, and the intro and the ending, a lot of different parts like that. And it's happening continuously. So this is just something to think about. Are there elements that you could kind of automate in your animation instead of having to keyframe this in After Effects or anything like that? I just have this kind of running on its own time, and it's just an extra element that I can add into my scene. When I'm starting a story, it can feel really overwhelming to add extra characters into the mix. If it's a bartender or a background pedestrian or something like that, making a new character just feels very overwhelming, particularly for something that's only going to be seen for a few seconds. So when I'm creating extra characters, I try to come up with some shortcuts, thinking about how they're going to be used and the parts that I need and I don't need. So this knight type character that's meant to represent From Software video games like Elden Ring shows up at the end for like 5 seconds. He has basically one throwaway line and that's it. So I probably spent a total of maybe 2-3 hours on this character. It really wasn't a lot. I drew him out in fresco, just quick sketch, broke things into layers as much as I possibly could so I could have a little bit more control when I wanted it later. And then when I brought it into Character Animator, I basically did the bare minimum I needed to make the character work. This arm, for example, holding the sword, it's going to stay still. It is not going to move. I didn't need to add any rigging for that. I did know that I wanted the character to put its arm up and show this rune and this severed finger for the joke at the end. So in that one, I did have to rig this and do lim IK and all of that normal stuff. For the mouth, I just added a jaw and just had that move up and down instead of doing a whole lip sync set or anything like that. And that I also added a little bit of dangle to some of the hair in the background. So hopefully this character still feels lively and dynamic enough that it's interesting to show up at the end. I've got some hair movement, I've got the jaw movement, and I have the arm that can move back and forth. And when I press the 1 key for the trigger, that's how the rune and the severed finger show up. So these are like 3 or 4 things that I'm adding to the character. Oh, and the lights, of course, blinking like I just showed as well to add some stuff there. This is not perfect. There's a bunch more I could do. I mean, imagine if I added some head turns or some additional arm movement over here or a glimmering of the sword. I don't have time for that. I don't want to do that for a 5-second throwaway gag at the end of the episode. The landlord character was another character that I did pretty quickly. Sketched it out in fresco, kept all the layers and separate, and then just did some really basic stuff for expressiveness. So I have a standard mouse set that I got from the CH Resources website where you can get free mouse sets and blank templates and all of that. And because of that, if I press 1, I can have her be happy. Now, I ended up not even using this. She's not happy in the entire thing, so she only has the sad mouse set. And then I did a bunch of different eyebrow positions. So we have her being, a little bit angrier and having kind of these slightly raised eyebrows, and then both raised up at the same time. That's it. Those are the only additional triggers I had. And then I really turned down the head movement to be pretty subtle as she moved back and forth, because she's a big arcade machine. I didn't want it to move that much. So the bottom line is, think about your script, think about what you need, and know what you can cut back on. I know this character doesn't need a torso, below the torso, doesn't need legs. I know I don't need this arm to be rigged. I know I don't need a full mouse set or eyes for this character. Think about what you can get away with and save yourself a little bit of time. In the complete cartoon workflow video, I talked about how adding shadows behind your characters will help make them feel like they're actually living in this world and this scene and add a little more depth to your compositions. So this is, this is nice and easy. As the characters are moving around, these shadows appear behind them. Basically, I just duplicate the dynamic linked file. I put it behind the character, offset a little bit, change the color to be black, and add a little bit of blur to it. And this adds that nice little thing. But notice here, the character is sitting on the couch, and I want the wall to feel like it's farther behind the character. And so in this case, notice PlayStation's head, he's got a shadow behind him here on the couch, but not on the wall. So how do you do something like this? Well, let's do it for Xbox over here. So here's Xbox is a shadow layer. I have that selected. I'm gonna go up here to the pen tool, and I'm just gonna add a really simple mask where I want it to show up. So let's just do shape like this, really crude. And now notice what's happened. Now the shadow is only showing up inside the masked area and not showing up behind the character. And so now as I go through this scene, it's gonna feel like the character is on this couch, but that the wall is gonna be a little bit further behind it. Really subtle detail that probably you don't notice, but it's a nice little effect that helps sell the world a little bit more. You might notice that when you're trying to do a multi-character cartoon and you're bringing all these characters in from Character Animator and dynamic linking them into After Effects, performance can sometimes take a hit. When I move down here, to see things several scenes later, it takes a few seconds for After Effects to think about what's happening and where that next step is, and then finally, it's gonna shift to that frame. When I'm trying to do this over and over again and edit, that 5 or 6 seconds may be too long of a performance hit, and depending on your machine, if it's an older machine, this can take even longer. So right now, I've got 5 characters in the scene, Switch is kind of hidden behind here, and they all have shadows as well. So basically, I have 10 Character Animator files that are being dynamic linked into this After Effects file. And that is why this is taking so long. If you're running into these kind of performance issues, you may find you have better success and faster performance if you do a ping sequence and wave instead. So one of your export options in a scene is to go to File, Export, Ping Sequence, and Wave. And this is basically going to make a folder that is going to include every frame of your animation as a transparent PNG file. So if you're doing a 3 or 4 minute cartoon, this is going to take a decent amount of time to export all these frames out. So here we go. I've got this PNG sequence of all the different parts that this character has. If I look at the stats for this, it is about 5 gigs worth of data, and it is actually 5,231 files. So that's a decent amount. However, now I don't have to wait around for After Effects and Character Animator to communicate. I know exactly what each frame is going to look like, and this may save me a little bit of time when I'm in the world of After Effects. All right, so back in After Effects, let's go to File, Import, File. We're gonna find the first thing in my PNG sequence here, and I'm gonna go down here and make sure it's set to PNG sequence. It should recognize that there's a sequence of them here, and I'm also gonna do Create Composition as well. Click OK, and now I've got my character in this sequence, and it's gonna play back really nice and smoothly. And I know that everything is exactly the frame that I want it to be. You're probably going to want to check your composition settings as well. By default, it's going to the last I had here, 1920 by 1080, but you might want to give yourself a little bit more height so your character doesn't get cut off. Again, this is a scene, a composition that we're going to be dragging into other compositions to kind of put everything together. I also definitely don't want this frame rate to default to 30. This cartoon was done in 24 frames per second, so refer back to how your character, how you did things in Character Animator and the frame rate you used there, and make sure it's the same here for everything to match up correctly. So that looks good. I'll hit OK. And I probably also want my audio for my character, so let's import that as well. File, import file. Find all the way at the bottom of your ping sequence, you'll find this wave file. I don't want to create a composition for this. I just want my wave file. Open it up. Here it shows up. Let's drag it into our scene. And now I've got the audio matching with everything else. So this is going to make your character easier to manipulate and play around with and not have a lot of waiting for the dynamic link from Character Animator to After Effects to work out. Now the problem is if I make a change, if I wanted this character, for example, to blink at a different time and I go back to Character Animator, I'm going to have to re-render that entire ping sequence, but I should just, if I save over where the original position of all those original ping sequence pings showed up, then After Effects should automatically realize that that's a change and it should automatically update. So it's one additional export step I have to do in Character Animator, but it might save me a lot of extra time later in After Effects. Remember that in cartoons, it's okay to exaggerate things a little bit. So in this case, Switch is walking in and he runs into this plant. And basically there's this crash and he kind of falls over. It's kind of just a what is going on moment. He's just being silly and he kind of yells as it happens. There's a lot of different things that are going on at the same time to make this kind of over the top. So he walks into it. There's this poof animation. It's a PNG sequence that I found from game design, basically sprites that they had for a poof animation, a PNG sequence. I also found a royalty-free crash sound effect that I play over top of it. It actually sounds like a car crash and glass shattering, but that's okay. It just it feels like there's an impact and it felt funny. And then the characters, the character of Switch and the plant, I rotate them in After Effects. I take the characters and I just kind of bounce them out of the way. There's a more subtle bounce for the plant, but then Switch kind of bounces away and almost off the screen a little bit. So when you do things like that, when there's an impact or kind of a visual gag or something like this, I think it's okay to kind of go over the top and add a bunch of different things at the same time. The sound effect, the bounce, the poof here of smoke that's showing up. All these things come together to create kind of a funny moment. So just think about those types of instances in your cartoons and see where you can add these sorts of things. When you're setting up the environment and world where your show begins, or you are transitioning between different scenes, think about those transitions and those establishing shots and how they might work. So in Consoles, we slowly zoom in at the beginning to this city. There's some clouds kind of moving, and notice that there's just kind of this slow zoom in. This would be a lot more boring if this was just a static shot and just the clouds were moving. But having a little bit of forward zoom is going to make it a little more interesting. And then look what happens. This kind of slides out of view. It kind of has some motion blur to it and slides out. And now we are moving into the first scene, and it's zooming in to start to establish a shot. Again, none of this is static. This is not static, and this isn't static. I even have this blurred flower pot in front that's kind of moving out of the way, and I recorded that separately. That's just this separate element that I'm just kind of moving at a pace that I feel looks good. There's no like 3D tracking or anything. I just moved it, scaled it up, and moved it out of the frame. And then I'm slowly zooming into my scene here to make it look like it's starting to zoom in, like we're just starting to zoom in and see what is actually happening here. The same thing is true later on when we move from the apartment to the landlord's office. And so there's several shots that happen here where we start from the apartment, then it kind of flips out of the side. I actually have a sound effect, like a whoosh sound effect, as this moves out of the way. And now the landlord actually starts talking right here. So I don't wait to get into the office, but she says, okay, let me get this straight. This is also slowly zooming in, just like everything else. And then eventually you get to here. And again, there's a little bit of a slow zoom out here as we establish where this new scene is. So this is just something to think about as you are transitioning between your different scenes and moving between them. Think about when the audio comes in. Think about zooming in and out. This is a really quick thing. This probably took me, 15, 20 minutes to draw, but that's all it takes to kind of set the scene for where we're going next. And then it transitions, and just a simple zoom is going to help get us into this next scene and transition us smoothly. If you have characters with traditional lip sync, like the landlord character, the Switch in this cartoon, with the mouse shapes changing all the time like this, the new feature, compute lip sync from transcript and audio, is extremely helpful. There's a whole video tutorial about how to do this, but basically, just to show you what's happening behind the scenes here, if I have this wave file selected of her audio and I look over here, I have a full transcript of everything that she's saying. And I did this in Premiere Pro. It's easy, it's free, it's quick. I just brought in the audio file, did the transcript, and then export out that SRT file and brought it in here. And it's got all my time information, and it's looking great. So then when I'm ready to do my actual lip sync, all I have to do is select the character and go to Timeline, Compute Lip Sync Take from Audio and transcript. And that's going to make the audio, the lip sync, look a lot more connected, because now we're not just listening to the audio information, we also know the words that you actually want the character to say, and we can use those to make the lip sync look even more accurate. And that's going to save you a lot of time later on. I feel like I barely had to edit any of the mouth shapes because of this transcript-based audio thing. So to me, it's a huge time saver. Now, sometimes the lip sync and the transcript aren't matching up correctly. Character Animator starts to freak out, and it gives you this little error message here that says, compute lip sync failed. Check that the transcript matches the audio. Well, it looked like everything was working as I thought it would. And instead of going in and, trying to make sure, like, what did someone say or where did it mess up? The best thing that I find, the easiest way around this, is to go where that mark is. I'm going to press Command-Shift-D on Mac or Control-Shift-D on Windows to duplicate this audio. I'm going to move over until where it started picking up again, and I'm going to press Command-Shift-D again. And now I've just got this audio right here that's the isolated version of where I don't have my lip sync. I still have some audio here, but it's not quite working the way I wanted it to. So now I'm just going to turn off the audio of the tracks I'm not using. And now let's just do this section right here. I know the transcript isn't going to work, so I'm just going to go back to the old method. That's okay, because I only have like 10 seconds here that I'm working with. I can work with that. I can edit that if I want to. And I'm going to go to Timeline, Compute Lip Sync, Take from Scene Audio. And what did that do? It took that section and gave me the corresponding lip sync below. And now I've kind of fixed that 10-second section and I'm ready to move on. So if you do run into errors, which might happen particularly for longer stretches of cartoons where there's these little bumps in the road, don't let that get you down. Just do that quick duplicate thing, isolate the section, the 5-10 seconds, whatever it is that's messed up, do that repair, and you should be ready to go. And finally, let's end with one of the most common questions I get, which is, how big should I make my character or background or scene or whatever? And the way I like to think about it is going backwards. So think about what your final resolution is going to be. So for me, I'm working on a 1920 by 1080 standard HD video. That's what I'm working with. So I might have certain shots that show, that are wide shots that show a lot of this area. Maybe it shows both robots and this Activision wizard. But then I might also want ones that are close-up shots. And the problem is I don't want to zoom in too far, scale up these characters too big to where they go above 100% scale. So for example, let's look at Xbox right now. He is currently set at 100% scale. But as I start to go above 100%, you're going to start to see little artifacts are blurring. It's not going to look as crisp as it would before. And as I get bigger, all these little details and things, it's not looking the way I want it to. And that's going to be really apparent in your video if you scale things up too much. So the way around this is I make what I like to call a mega scene. So this composition is called mega scene. And this is just a huge composition that has everything in it. My different props, foreground elements, characters, things in front of them, behind them, all of that stuff. So if I go to my composition settings over here, this scene is 10,000 pixels wide by 5,000 pixels tall. Now that's way bigger than the 1920 by 1080 video that I'm eventually going to make. But this basis, laying this all out, now gives me something that I can work with no matter what scene I want. So something I'll try to do is think about what is my biggest close-up shot? What is the biggest that I'm going to want these characters? And that's what I'm going to build everything around. So I know if this character, if Xbox is at 100%, then I know I want him to be everything else to work around him. It's okay if it got smaller, if I'm doing a like a wide shot or something like that. It's okay if he's like 90% or 80%. But I don't want him to be 110%, 120% zooming in on him, and it's just going to look a little worse. So one thing I'll do is I will go to Layer, New, Solid, and make a solid for the size of my eventual video. So 1920 by 1080. Let's do this, and let's just call it Guide. And that's going to create this purple rectangle. I'm going to move it to the top of everything, press T for transparency, opacity, and change that to 50. Okay, so now what I've got is this purple window basically that I can use as a guide to think about some of my shots. So that looks like a pretty good close-up for what Xbox might look like. And that looks like a pretty good close-up for what PlayStation might look like. Now, if I think he's maybe a little too big, I could go to PlayStation and kind of size him down a little bit more if I feel like he's going to fit in the frame a little bit better. So now I've got this one scene that I know is going to fit everything that I need for when the characters are in the apartment. So when I need to make a close-up shot, for example, I'm just going to go find my mega scene. I'm going to drag it over top of the other composition to create a new composition. It's called Megascene 2 here, but let's call this Xbox Close-Up. Now it's called Xbox Close-Up. I have several that I've done before, but let's call this one, Xbox Close-Up 3, for example. And then let's go to Composition Settings, and instead of this huge number, I'm going to do my 1920 by 1080. What that is going to do is take this scene. So this scene is unchanged below here. I'm just changing what kind of view I have of it. And now I have my close-up of Xbox here, and I know that it's going to work exactly like I wanted to. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, my mega scene is still doing everything. And so now if I want another scene, let's say I want a close-up of PlayStation instead, I could just duplicate this scene, and let's call it now PS Close-Up. And now let's go to where that is, PS Close-Up, double-click that, just move it over here. Boom, now I've got another scene. And I can either export each of these out as their own videos and then edit them in something like Premiere Pro, or if you're crazy like me, you could actually do some of your editing in After Effects itself. So I probably don't recommend this. I just kind of like keeping everything in one place, but it is a little messy. You're going to get just a ton of layers. And I just go from, okay, here's this one scene, this close up here, to this other scene. I always have, this one underneath, and then it moves to this different composition. And all I'm doing is bringing these compositions in. They're all starting at 0, 0, and then I just trim to where one takes over and the other one ends or begins and all of that. So that's the main takeaway. Make a scene that's big enough for whatever your eventual closest shot would be. Create this little temporary guide to show what your close-ups will look like, and you'll know what that is. And then create your scene and just keep creating comps, and everything will look great when it's at 100%, and you're gonna get a really nice looking end product. So I hope at least a couple of those tips were helpful to you. Every time I do a new cartoon, I'm always learning new things. I'm watching a lot of video tutorials myself, learning how to do different tips and tricks and techniques. And hopefully every cartoon just gets a little bit better, not just better in the overall quality and end product, but I become more efficient in my workflow. And I find those shortcuts that help me save a little bit of time while still getting a great end result. So if you make anything using this tutorial or anything with Character Animator, we would love to see it. So please use hashtag Character Animator on social media when you're sharing it so myself and the rest of the team can check it out. And if you run into any troubles with anything that I've shown here or any other questions that you might have about Character Animator, After Effects, Photoshop, Fresco, all the different parts of the ecosystem, the best place to get help is the official Character Animator forums. All right, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching and have fun.